So thanks for the opportunity to present. I was asked to give an overview of how the CBMP, we'll call it the CBMP for short, because that's a long title, developed over time and how we've actually implemented the program, sustained it, or trying to sustain it. So really what I want to focus on is some lessons learned through the process of developing this program. And most of the lessons we've learned is through trial and error, mostly error. So we seem to be succeeding despite ourselves. So first off, the CBMP is a cornerstone program of one of the Arctic Council's working groups, CAF, Conservation of Arctic Flora and Fauna. And it's been led by Canada since 2005. And before that, Iceland chaired the program. And actually this month, we'll finally be passing the program off, the leadership of the program, to both the Kingdom of Denmark, Tom Christensen, and the United States, John Payne. John, can you put your hand up? So these two capable folks will be taking over the chairmanship of the program for at least 2 years, and we hope a little bit longer. So what the CBMP essentially is an international network of scientists as well as what we call local resource users, so community experts, in particular Indigenous experts, simply bringing them together and working together to improve our ability to detect important changes in the Arctic ecosystems and the biodiversity they support, understand what's driving that change, and very importantly, get that information out into the hands of decision makers. And whenever I talk about decision makers in this talk, I'm thinking not just of national governments or senior officials, but I'm also thinking about regional governments, regional organizations, co-management boards, and even local people in the Arctic in particular, such as harvesters. So how do we make information relevant to them, but also bring the information that their observations up through our program so that we can gain a better understanding. And currently, the CBMP has just over 80 organizations around the world that put staff time and or funding into the program. And we're connected to just over 1,000 people, so close to 1,100 people. So we've grown quite a bit. And we're using new technology to try and connect information sources that are found across the Arctic and also outside of the Arctic using new web technology. So we're trying to become a focal point and really shorten the response time between the information that's collected and getting that information into the hands of decision makers. Some strategic linkages that we have are with the United Nations Environment Program. Our program is a partner in something called the Biodiversity Indicator Partnership. So this is a global partnership of different organizations such as Wetlands International, FAO, so on and so forth, that are working together to improve the development of biodiversity indicators for the Convention on Biological Diversity. So how do we actually build in better indicators that we can deploy at the national level and at the international level to track our progress, or perhaps lack thereof, towards the goals to reduce the rate of biodiversity loss. We're also directly connected to the CBD, so the information that's generated out of the CBMP has been used to populate the Global Biodiversity Outlook 3 reports, will be a component of the GBO4, and we also bring information in more live formats to the CBD process and through the Arctic Council. We're also one of 4 formal regional biodiversity observing networks of the Group on Earth Observations Biodiversity Observing Network system. And so I'm a steering committee member on that, and we're also linked to the Ecosystem Societal Benefit Area. And one thing that's been quite neat is that there's a number of what we call regional bonds forming in different parts of the world. And in particular, some of them are taking the CBMP model and applying it to develop there. So we're actually developing some tools. We're creating something called Bond in a Box, so Biodiversity Observing Network in a Box, which is basically a toolkit that we can give to other regions of the world, say it's Latin America, Europe, or others, where you've got data tools, organizational tools, and so forth, to try and actually promote the uptake and development of these regional bonds, but also to make sure that we have at least some harmonization in our effort. Some emerging partnerships is, and Terry Callaghan mentioned this yesterday, is the Arctic Biodiversity Coalition. So this is recognizing that the CBMP is just one small part of the puzzle, and that understanding change around the Arctic's ecosystems is not something that we think we can do alone, so we very much need those connections to the research community, such as IASC, ISAC, Interact, and so forth. We're also forming an agreement with the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, so they can actually harvest our data, and we can also pull Arctic relevant data from their system. And we're beginning some work with the Google Earth Engine to get their help using the cloud to actually analyze lots and lots of remote sensing information, which we would have to use a supercomputer otherwise. The CBMP approach focuses on a few key areas. One of them is on capacity building. So we recognize that we're far underserved when it comes to our effort to understand change in Arctic ecosystems. And we really see a huge opportunity, in particular with local Arctic residents, to actually engage the people that are around year after year, season over season, have intergenerational knowledge and perspectives on change, and actually start to use those folks and access their knowledge, but also use them sort of as a human sensor, so using citizen science techniques to actually improve our observation approaches in the Arctic. But the core of the CBMP is really on trying to get better coordination of our existing monitoring and data effort around the Arctic. So what we decided to do is break the Arctic down into 4 biomes: marine, coastal, freshwater, and terrestrial. And the coastal one hasn't formed yet, but the other 3 are well on their way. And essentially these are groups of scientists as well as indigenous experts that get in a room together and develop a pan-Arctic integrated biodiversity monitoring plan. And the focus is very much on stitching together or squeezing more value out of our existing monitoring effort, and also really focusing on existing data and information sources. So we recognize that there's a lot of excellent information out there already. The Arctic's awash in satellite data. We have lots of TEK, intergenerational knowledge out there. We have some excellent long-term data sets, in particular in Russia, which we've actually been successful at being able to access. So there's a real opportunity, and other people have mentioned this, to backcast and actually set baselines further back in time. And also our focus very much is on asking ourselves, what are the reporting mandates of national governments, the Arctic Council, regional governments, and so forth? Because if we're not relevant to them, as Donald McLennan was mentioned to me many, many times and hammered into my head, is someone's going to pull the plug on your funding eventually. So this is just one of those organizational diagrams that shows you how it works. The center is really what we call the engines. So these are our Arctic biodiversity monitoring programs, our expert monitoring groups. And they connect to a whole myriad of networks that are operating at different scales for all sorts of different reasons. There's lots of great monitoring networks in the Arctic, regional ones, local ones, national ones, and some international ones. Some of them, such as CARMA, focus on caribou. We've got ITEX, which is experimental manipulations of tundra plant communities and so forth. And we're exploring much better connections with Interact, which is a huge opportunity to really plug into the site-based networks around the Arctic and pull all this together, get better information out into these data packages, and get it out into the hands of decision makers. So that's really our focus. So what we do is when we develop these monitoring plans, the first thing we ask ourselves, although this is one of those hard lessons learned, we didn't do this when we developed our marine plan, but we do this now, is we ask ourselves, what are the key monitoring objectives and questions? So what are the policymakers, the decision makers, the funders, what do they want? What do they actually want, and how can our monitoring plan feed that? And then we define the scope of that particular monitoring plan, both geographically but also thematically. And then based on that, we start to develop conceptual scenarios and conceptual models of the entire system, but also of different components of the system. And from that, we have a very difficult argument over what are the key components of those systems to monitor, as well as the key processes that we should be monitoring. And from that, we then drill down to identifying some essential variables that should be monitored. What's the sampling approach? So who can do this? how frequently, where, and we also look at our existing monitoring platforms and capacity to ask ourselves, how far short are we? And this is just an example of some of the sampling designs that come out of our monitoring plans. Now, the big question is how do you actually connect to all those different people and organizations and networks around the Arctic in an efficient but also an effective way? So our freshwater plan, which has just been approved, is now going to implementation. And this is pretty much the model that we're going forward with, is that we have a representative from each Arctic nation, and that person essentially is a quarterback or a focal point. And their job, we don't necessarily want the best top scientists from each of those nations in here. We want people that are very good networkers. They often are the best scientists, but not necessarily. But we want networkers, people that can actually connect and develop national networks within their own nation based on that particular challenge. So these people are developing national networks in the US and so forth on freshwater biodiversity. And then through the steering group, we can actually connect in as best as we can to all the myriad of different efforts and start to organize ourselves and try and improve how we actually monitor that particular ecosystem. So that's the approach we use. And it's very much a work in progress. I can't say it's successful yet. We hope it is, but we might have to tweak it as we go. Some examples of the outputs or the value of integrating our efforts. For instance, we've developed something called the Arctic Biodiversity Data Service, and this is a data system. It's both a distributed data system that can harvest data from different servers, wherever they might be through the internet, but it also includes static data sets. And this screenshot is just showing you the Arctic countries through our Circumpolar seabird group. And what they do is they've made their data available through the internet, and that's a very powerful thing. So when a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service researcher is finished doing surveys for the field season in a particular area, and they've got their counts of how many seabirds on particular colonies for that year, and that data's been QA/QC'd, it goes onto their server, and it becomes live. And that's a very powerful thing. If we ever had, God forbid, an oil spill, you can use a system like this to very quickly assess what biological assets might be at risk. So instead of having to pick up the phone and try and talk to everybody in that particular area, you can start to actually get that data in a more quick fashion. Also, it's very useful for things like environmental assessment and land use planning, and it's useful for scientists as well. So these are the kind of systems that we're trying to build to shorten that response time between the data collection and getting it into the hands of the decision makers. But we work very much with the willing, so we recognize that not everyone's comfortable making their data live on the internet yet. It's a process. And this just shows some of the other data holdings that are onto the system. A lot in Russia, actually. We've been very successful in Russia through programs such as the Arctic Breeding Bird Conditions Survey, and also through development of our Arctic Species Trend Index. Russia was actually the biggest contributor of data to that index. And when we started that project, we thought we'd get very little data, but we actually got the most data from them. And it was because we actually figured out who the right people were to talk to and how to connect to those data sets. Some examples of the integration are when you actually, of course, aggregate and integrate data sets, long-term data sets, you can start to tease out patterns and natural cycles. So this is aggregating Arctic pelagic fish population trends. And you can see, and this is something that Don Russell actually analyzed for us, you can see that there's a pretty tight correlation with the Arctic oscillation. And that's a really neat finding, because if we are going to consider commercial fisheries in the Arctic Ocean, it's useful to know how climate may be actually driving these systems, and you can project that over time. Also, our Circumpolar seabird group, through aggregating data at the Pan-Arctic level, has discovered some interesting relationships between abrupt changes in sea surface temperature and murre productivity. And this came out of the researchers just simply meeting every year, and one of them saying, hey, my murre populations, my murre colonies crashed this year. Did it happen with you? And everyone around the room has said, yeah, the same thing happened to me. So it's very powerful when you just bring people together. And then the question was, well, is this happening on a Pan-Arctic scale, or is there some sort of larger forcing of the system that's occurring? And they were able to attribute it with sea surface temperature. Some other outputs that we have is we piggyback ruthlessly. So we're a pretty small group, so we don't have a massive communications machine behind us, although we do have one. But we piggyback with groups such as NOAA, the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So we help them build and release the Arctic report cards every year, which is a great tool for getting information out to the media, the public, to other scientists on different parts of the Arctic system and what are the recent changes. So I was asked to talk about how this program developed. So here you go. It started with one guy. This guy's name is Ivar Peterson from Iceland, and he had an idea that he felt there was an opportunity to actually connect all the different experts around the Arctic and squeeze more value by just simply talking and bringing those people together. So then I got a call in 2005 and said, hey, can you work on the Circumpolar Biodiversity Monitoring Program? And I sucked in Michael Sabota, who's sitting over there as well, into this. And I had no idea what this program was. So we went to Ottawa and started talking about it, and we developed a 5-year implementation plan, a small group of us. And then we launched the program in September of that year in Cambridge, and about 100 people came, and I was kind of shocked and scared by this because suddenly I realized there was actually a lot of expectation and excitement around this program. And we realized that we can't really fool around here. We actually have to do something. And today now we have all these different expert networks that are working at the Pan-Arctic scale. This is our freshwater group. This is our terrestrial group, and we also have a marine group. So essentially, what's behind all of this is simply bringing people together, bringing ideas, and I think the success we've had is through all of these people that have been willing to put that 5%, 10% extra effort into their day jobs to actually connect. And there's a lot of value added for that, and I'll talk about that in a sec. So why have we gone from one person to over 1,080 organizations? I really have no idea, but here's what I think are some of the secrets to our success. And I think some of it was good timing, and perhaps we were lucky. But I very much believe that first and foremost, you have to build on your existing monitoring capacity and information. And we had a lot of debates about this. But while we recognize that it's woefully inadequate, we first need to show the funders that we can do a better job and connect better and squeeze more value out of our existing effort, but also identify what those priority gaps are. Start small, maintain focus, and prioritize. This is certainly something that really helped us as we built on our success. We had a very focused implementation plan. We tried not to waver from that, and we really prioritized the timing of rolling this out. Keep it simple. Simple, efficient internal organization is really important, and we've tried some different ways to connect to the different experts around the Arctic. At the end of the day, you need a really simple structure to do that. And again, be relevant. It's really important to link to the reporting mandates. For us, things like the Convention on Biological Diversity, we know that scientists would tell you that those indicators that they've chosen are bad ones, or they're not really getting to the real problem. And I would agree with that. But that's an international convention that has 192 countries behind it. And you can actually do some interesting things when you actually start to populate those indicators. So you have to be relevant, even though you might feel that at times you're swaying from your beautiful model. Budget for data management, analysis, and reporting, that one's harped on a lot, but we definitely focus very much on reporting and outreach. And show value added of integration. So early on, the researchers in particular were saying to me, you know, what do I get out of this? Why would I want to play with you? You know, I'm busy, I'm maxed out as it is. What do I get out of this? And we really had to think very hard about how you actually design a program that actually serves the people that are feeding into it. And for scientists and other experts, such as Indigenous experts, we built it in a way that you actually create a commons or an area where you can share information and data, which of course scientists very much like. And we focus a lot on tools to make their lives easier, funding for the networks, and very importantly, greater publication potential. So we're seeing some multi-authored publications come out of just simply getting funding to bring all these people together. They're getting more publications out. So there you go. And it's very important not to just get people to give you what they're already doing and then just put your stamp on it. That, I think, is a really big mistake, to say, well, because the research is going to figure that out and say, well, I'm doing this anyways, what good are you to me? So there really has to be that value added. And I think for decision makers, we need to show them very quickly that by linking together, you can actually give answers to questions otherwise unanswered. And I think we've started to be able to do that in our program. And that's very much been the focus, is not to tell the funders that in 10 years you're going to get some really awesome outputs and data, but we needed to get some early high-profile results out that are very compelling, very visual. And we've been able to do that. They're not perfect. We're aggregating existing data, but we've actually already made some big leaps in our understanding of how the Arctic ecosystems work, and we're actually getting that out to decision makers and to senior bureaucrats, such as senior officials in the Arctic Council. And this is what builds your support and sustains your program. Another lesson that we've learned is maintaining diverse funding sources and leverage, and Martin Fortier talked about this yesterday. And one of the biggest funders for our program has actually been foreign affairs departments. It's not environmental sources of funding or research pots, but foreign affairs departments, because they really like to see international collaboration. I think it's important to set standards but be flexible. So I'm a big fan for these essential variables that Martin talked about. They'll help us link globally, but also they'll give us sort of a unifying principle or a way that we can actually interact. It's not to say that other variables won't be important to your program, but if we can at least agree on some core flexible standards, we're in much better shape. And I think developing a brand is really important. So we kind of bluffed our way through this a little bit. We were not much of anything, but we started to get some authority by actually having some rules around which we sanctioned programs in the Arctic. So they had to involve at least 2 countries. They had to agree to put their data in our data service, and so on and so forth. And what you find is people are actually quite willing and happy to do that. And then you actually set up a brand. You start to get people to organize around you, and you can actually get some direction. We noticed a few years ago that there was mostly a lot of old people in our groups. Not that I have anything against old people, but we realized that this is a long-term program, and we really need to recruit young people into it. So we've been working with APEX, Association of Polar Early Career Scientists, to do that. And finally, include equipped champions with influence. And Martin Fortier also mentioned this yesterday. So on our steering committees, we have people in those Arctic countries that are quite influential with funding sources, and we kind of equip them because they're often people that are very busy, so we give them products, presentations, and so forth. So we create champions for the program, and I think that really helps to actually sustain the effort. And I think we can apply these to what we're trying to do here in this summit. So thanks.